For 5 years she brought him food behind the bakery, never asking for his name, never expecting anything in return. He barely spoke, just nodded in silence as she placed the meal beside him. People warned her, said he was dangerous, unstable, maybe even pretending, but she kept coming every single day. And on her wedding day, when 20 Navy SEALs in full uniform walked into the church asking for her by name, she finally understood who he really was. Welcome to Hidden Sparks. Before we continue this emotional story, tell us in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Her name was Emma Collins. She wasn't rich, she wasn't famous, just a small-town girl with a soft voice and a job at the corner bakery her parents had started before she was born. She opened every morning at 6, prepped the coffee, arranged the muffins, and swept the sidewalk like clockwork. The bakery sat on the edge of Main Street, between the florist and a barber shop that hadn't updated its prices since 1998. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your middle name, and where any act of kindness stood out. Emma first noticed him one winter morning. He was sitting behind the bakery near the alley, knees pulled to his chest, wrapped in a faded olive coat that looked decades old. He wasn't begging, wasn't saying anything at all, just sitting there, perfectly still, like a man waiting for something that had already passed. She watched him from the back window for a few days, saw how he never moved, never asked for help, never looked anyone in the eye. On the 4th day, she packed an extra sandwich, added a cup of coffee, and placed it next to him without a word. He didn't say thank you, just nodded once, slowly, like someone acknowledging a code only 2 people understood. The next day she did it again, and again. It became routine. She never asked for his name, he never offered it. But she began noticing little details. A pair of boots too clean for the rest of him, posture too straight to be accidental, a glance toward the flag outside the post office that lingered longer than most. There was discipline in the way he sat, the way he folded the napkin after eating, the way he seemed to disappear into silence rather than drown in it. People started to notice. Her co-workers whispered, "You know that guy's always back there?" A cashier said once, "Kinda creepy, don't you think?" A few customers made comments too. One woman dropped a $10 bill on the counter and said, "Maybe stop feeding him, he's just going to stay longer?" But Emma didn't answer because something in her gut told her this man wasn't dangerous. He wasn't lost. He was waiting for something or someone. Her fiancé, Dylan, wasn't thrilled either. "I just don't get why you keep doing this," he said one night. "You don't even know who he is." But she didn't need to know. There was something in the man's silence that felt familiar, not broken, just buried. As the seasons passed, Emma brought him food through heat waves, blizzards, storms. Sometimes he was already gone when she arrived, sometimes he was asleep, but the meal always disappeared, and the napkin was always folded neatly when she returned. 5 years. No words exchanged, no explanations. Just one small act repeated, quietly, like a heartbeat. She never told him she was getting married, and yet, on the morning of her wedding, something told her to check the alley one last time. He wasn't there. The church was quiet, warm, and filled with sunlight when Emma arrived. The windows filtered the morning light through soft colors, casting muted reds and blues across the polished floor as guests took their seats. She stood in the hallway just outside the chapel, holding her bouquet, dressed perfectly fitted, her father at her side whispering gentle encouragements. Everything around her was just as it should be, simple, elegant, sincere. There were no expensive photographers, no glamorous guests, no overdone decorations. It was a small-town wedding, but it felt honest. Dylan was already at the altar, standing tall in his navy suit, smiling with the kind of calm confidence she had always admired in him. The music was starting, her hands were steady, but her mind wasn't entirely there because she had checked that morning. Before the makeup artist arrived, before the florist dropped off the bouquet, before the bridesmaids started knocking at her door, she slipped out the back and walked down the same alley she had walked hundreds of times before. The bench was empty. Not just empty, it was untouched. The coffee cup she had left the day before was still there, cold. The napkin still folded beside it. No footprints, no signs of movement. For the first time in 5 years, the man wasn't there, she told herself. It was just a coincidence that maybe he had finally moved on, or maybe something had happened she'd never know about. But it didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like something had been quietly taken away. He hadn't warned her, hadn't left a note, just vanished. And now, standing at the edge of her own wedding, surrounded by people who loved her, she couldn't ignore the emptiness that shadowed the corner of her mind. The music swelled. Her father offered his arm. She nodded, smiled, stepped forward as the doors opened. Every guest turned, some teary-eyed already, others smiling wide. She moved with grace, bouquet in hand, veil light over her shoulders. But her eyes scanned the crowd, row by row, instinctively searching for the shape of him, the posture, the jacket, the silence, nothing. The back pew, left side, the spot he would have chosen if he had come, was empty. She smiled at Dylan as she reached the altar, took his hand, listened to the officiant begin his welcome, but her thoughts lingered. Her mind pulled backward, to mornings spent pressing sandwiches into brown bags, to the way he'd nod without ever speaking, to the eyes that always followed the flag as it was raised across the street. She never asked his name. She never needed to. But now she wished she had. The pastor began the vows. Dylan squeezed her hand. She nodded again, focused, present, grateful, but still not whole, and then it happened. A sound rose from the back of the church, not loud, just measured, heavy. The unmistakable echo of military dress shoes striking the floor in perfect sync. The entire congregation turned their heads as 20 men entered the church in full Navy SEAL dress uniform, white gloves, gold buttons, boots polished like mirrors. They moved without a word, in 2 straight columns, step by step, until they reached the center aisle. There, they stopped. The one in front removed his white cap and spoke clearly, his voice steady and calm. "We're here for Emma Collins. Phoebe." Room went still. Dylan turned, confused. The pastor lowered his book. And Emma didn't move. Because standing just behind the line of uniforms toward the rear of the group was the man from the alley, not in rags, not in a coat stained by 5 winters. He was wearing a formal dress blue uniform adorned with rows of ribbons and medals she couldn't name. And above his heart, the unmistakable glint of a silver star and a golden seal trident. His shoulders were squared, his boots spotless, his expression unchanged. But for the first time, she saw how others looked at him, not with pity, not with dismissal, but with recognition. He stepped forward slowly, each movement controlled, precise. He stopped just before the first pew, placed his cap under his arm, and turned toward the altar. The man beside him, older, marked by years of command, spoke again. This woman served a man who once served this country without knowing his name, his rank, or his past. She gave kindness where the world gave none. She gave food, dignity, and silence. And for that, we are here today to thank her on behalf of those who never got the chance. Emma's breath caught. The room remained silent, and then, in unison, all 20 SEALs raised their right hands in a flawless salute. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something shifted inside her, a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying finally let go. She brought her hand slowly to her chest, touched the fabric just above her heart, and held it there, still. At that moment, the ceremony wasn't about flowers, or music, or seating arrangements. It wasn't about programs, or cake, or centerpieces. It was about one quiet act repeated over time, witnessed by no one, and finally, honored by many. After the salute, the men didn't speak. They lowered their hands as one and took a step back, returning to silent formation along the sides of the church aisle. No one moved. No one knew whether to applaud, to sit, or to speak. The pastor stood frozen. Dylan looked at Emma, his expression somewhere between awe and confusion. Emma, for her part, simply stared at the man in the dress blues, the one who had once sat in rags behind her bakery, who had taken her meals with silent nods and eyes that never stopped watching the flag. He took another step forward, slower this time. His face was exactly as she remembered, calm, unreadable. But now it carried the weight of something more, not just age or exhaustion, but history. He nodded once, subtly, as if to say, "Thank you." Or maybe, "I'm sorry." Or maybe nothing at all. Then he turned to the side, and the SEAL captain beside him stepped forward and addressed the room. His name is Thomas Riley, Captain, SEAL Team 4, Vietnam, Beirut, Desert Storm. He doesn't talk much about what he did, and he never asked anyone to. But when one of our own loses his footing, we don't leave him behind. This woman, he said, gesturing gently toward Emma, didn't know his name, his rank, or his record. She didn't ask. She didn't care. She saw a man who needed food, and she fed him, not once, not on holidays, every single day, for years. He paused, scanning the room. She didn't give charity. She gave dignity. There was a murmur in the back pews. Someone wiped their eyes. Even the pastor lowered his head slightly. The captain continued, "We don't often get to honor civilians. Most of our brothers who made it home keep their circle tight, but this man called me last month, the first time I'd heard his voice in over a decade. He said he needed a favor. I asked what kind. He said, 'I want 20 men to stand for someone who stood for me when no one else did.'" He looked back at Riley, then to Emma. He said it was urgent, that it had to be at her wedding. Emma stood completely still, the bouquet forgotten in her hands. She looked at Thomas, no longer the man behind the bakery, but Captain Riley, decorated, respected, still standing straight despite the years, still silent, still watching. And then he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. "I didn't know how to say thank you," he said. "Didn't know if you'd want it. You never asked for anything. You just showed up like it was normal, like I was worth the effort. For a long time, I didn't believe I was. You changed that." Emma tried to speak, but no sound came. Her chest was tight, her throat blocked by an emotion that had waited too long to surface. Thomas took one step closer, stopping just beside the front pew. "I've lost a lot of brothers," he said, "most of them buried under flags. A few I still see in dreams. But you brought me back. You reminded me what it feels like to be seen, not for what I did, but for who I am." Now he didn't look around. He didn't need applause. The room remained frozen, held in place by the weight of what he carried. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket, a small folded square of faded fabric. It was an old patch, SEAL Team 4, frayed at the edges, the stitching nearly worn. "Away." "I don't carry medals," he said, "but I carried this all the way from Da Nang to Fallujah." He extended it toward Emma. "This belongs with someone who knows what service really looks like." She didn't reach for it at first. She couldn't. Her fingers trembled, and her chest rose with the kind of breath that never quite makes it out. But finally, slowly, she stepped forward, took the patch between her fingers, and pressed it to her chest. The church didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. What filled the space was something deeper than clapping, something older, a silence rooted in reverence. In that moment, Emma didn't feel like the girl who ran the bakery on Main Street. She didn't feel like the one who packed sandwiches before dawn. She felt like someone standing under a flag, surrounded by men who knew what sacrifice meant, and had come not just to salute a veteran, but to thank a citizen who had honored him first. And when she finally turned to face Dylan again, her eyes full of tears, her voice steady but raw, she said just one thing before the ceremony resumed. He was never homeless. He was just waiting to be seen again. The ceremony continued, but something in the air had changed. What was supposed to be a wedding had become something more, a moment suspended between love and legacy, between civilian life and something deeper, rooted in sacrifice and silence. Emma stood with Dylan, her voice steady as she spoke her vows, but every word carried more weight now. Every "I do" felt wrapped in layers of meaning she hadn't expected. Dylan didn't seem confused anymore. He looked at her with something new in his eyes, like he understood the full shape of the woman standing. Beside him, when they kissed, the applause came, soft but real. And even among the rows of guests, a few seals allowed themselves a faint smile. After the ceremony, the 20 men remained. They didn't leave immediately. They stood at attention while the guests exited, while the pictures were taken, while the cease. Laughter slowly returned to the space. But before they stepped away, the captain approached Emma once more and handed her a folded American flag, not from a funeral, but from the pocket of his dress coat. He didn't explain, and then, without fanfare, the men turned in unison and marched out, formation tight, steps precise, disappearing into the daylight as quietly as they had arrived. Later that evening, as the reception wound down and the candles burned low, Emma stepped outside into the cool evening air. She stood alone for a moment, the flag folded in her arms, the old seal patch still pinned near her heart. She looked up at the stars, at the empty road, at the silence of a town that would never know exactly what had happened that day, but might feel its echo for years. Behind her, she heard footsteps, familiar, slow, and deliberate. She turned. Thomas stood at the edge of the gravel path, back in his old coat, not the uniform. His eyes were the same, quiet, steady, unwavering. "I won't stay," he said. "Didn't want to make it about me." Emma shook her head. "You didn't. You made it about all of us." He looked down for a second, then back up at the stars. "I lost a lot in the service," he murmured. "Brothers, time, parts of myself I'll never get back. But when someone brings you food every day without asking why, that's the kind of thing that gives a man something back, even if he doesn't realize it at first." She stepped forward, held out her arms, and embraced him, not like a savior, not like a soldier, but like a human being who simply mattered. He hugged her gently, then stepped back, his hand brushing the patch still pinned to her dress. "Keep that," he said. "It looks better on you." Then he turned and walked away, back into the night. No fanfare, no goodbyes, just the slow, dignified walk of a man who had been seen. The flag she held felt heavier than fabric. It felt like a responsibility. And as she returned to the reception, people stood aside without being asked. They didn't know exactly what she had done, but somehow everyone understood that something sacred had taken place in a quiet town, in a small church. With no camera crews or headlines, a woman had reminded the world what it meant to serve, not with a weapon, not with a uniform, but with consistency, respect, and grace. And 20 Navy SEALs had come to say thank you. This story was brought to you by Hidden Sparks. She didn't wear a uniform. She didn't take an oath. But every day, with one small act of quiet kindness, she honored something sacred. And when the time came, those who had once worn the uniform came, not to protect her, but to stand for her. Now, let us ask you, have you ever done something small for someone only to find out it meant more than you ever imagined? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe moments like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.